Hello, my name is Will Lindis, and this is the Movie Bears podcast. Each week, we review films, both current and classic, as well as dish on the latest in movie news through our husky, hairy, huggable homo lens. On this week's episode, we're going to be talking about a few films that have recently been released via some of the various streaming platforms. That's right, it's a streaming roundup. Now, unfortunately, we are a man down tonight. Unfortunately, Brad Harris can't be here with us due to a work commitment. But I am absolutely pleased as punch to be joined by my fellow co-host, the yin to my yang, Jim Pugliafico.
That's me, Jin Pugliafico. It's been renamed through the Wandering Earth app, Jin Pugliafico. Yes, just like on Lost. Yeah, I'm happy to be here, Will. Thanks. We're right. We are a man down. Brad has this kind of long-term work commitment that should be ending within a week or two. So we're going to be getting Brad. We're going to be getting Brad back pretty soon. But I'm really excited to be here with you to do something we haven't really done in a while, and that's talk about some movies that have been popping up. You know, more and more movies pop up on the streaming apps and, VOD rentals and so forth. And I was just recently on a business trip, so I got a chance to binge a whole crap load of movies. So we're going to talk about some of those, and I'm excited.
I mean, I'm excited too, and it's especially exciting because we just had an opportunity to hang out in the lovely city of Tucson. I was there on my business trip, which happened to intersect between your vacation and your business trip. We had exactly one evening free to go see a movie together, and it was an absolute highlight of my month.
Yeah, that was amazing, Will. Getting another chance to see you. Of course, we saw you for South by, which was awesome. Sometimes we get to see you for other film festivals, which is great too. But to see you here in Tucson is a rare treat for us. So, of course, we got together a bunch of friends, some other friends who were visiting in town. We Magic Mike Lovins and his husband Pete. And my daughter joined, and a couple of other friends, Steven and Sam, who are friends of the show. It was a big group. We went to see a movie, and we're not going to talk about that movie on this show. We're going to talk about, but we are going to talk about it.
Yeah, right? We're going to talk about it in that we're going to give you a preview of next week where we review Detective Pikachu, which is the movie that we saw. So we won't talk about it here. Although I will say it was a lot of fun. This was my first time to meet your daughter, and I know everyone that went to that particular screening came at the kind of like their experience levels with Pokemon and different. But I noticed that I feel like your daughter and I had like a similar grasp on the material going into it beforehand, and so it was really nice hearing her reference some things. I'm like, I know what she's talking about. I know what's going on there. It was really fun.
Yeah, and I'm of course on the outside looking in, listening to all of it. It's funny when she was growing up and she was into the Pokemon stuff, and we'll talk about this more. But I was only like peripherally aware of what it was. Never really got into it with her. And it's funny that now, 20 years later, or whatever it is, finally, getting to kind of connect with her on something else that we didn't really fully connect on before. So that was fun.
It was funny. There were some jokes where where we would be making jokes like, who's that Pokemon? And I kept thinking like Jim's probably sitting there going like, well, I don't know. Who is that Pokemon?
I don't fucking know who the Pokemon is.
It's Jigglytooth. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. No, it was a fun time. Anytime we can get together and watch movies, but yeah, the ones we're going to talk about today are kind of all over the map. Like I said, we haven't had a catch up like this in a while, and there's just there really are so many worthwhile movies out there, or at least ones you should check out to see if they're worthwhile for you. And that's kind of what we did. So we grabbed a whole bunch of these. We're going to talk about them.
Yeah. And to sort of set the table for all of that, so we're going to be talking about 3 films today. And because we're doing 3 instead of our normal 1 or 2, We're going to be a little bit more brief with our overall summaries and our reviews, which means we're not going to go into that spoiler pound town territory. Now, that said, we are going to be talking about films that are out right now. So there's, we're going to be talking about the synopsises, what we thought about them, and some of the kind of the non-spoilery details about them. So some of those details will be available to you, but we're going to avoid any major plot twists and anything, major, because these are things that you can watch right now on your television, on your iPad, on your phone. Don't watch movies on your phone, but you can watch movies. You can watch these movies right now after this episode if you so desire. So I think that's enough build up to this. Let's go ahead and dive into our first film. This movie is called Her Smell. So, Jim, can you tell us a little bit about her smell, where listeners can find Her Smell, and your thoughts on Her Smell?
Yeah, might not be the most appealing. I don't know. It depends on how you think about the title, but title like Her Smell, it intrigued me, not because of the title, but because Elizabeth Moss is the star of this movie, and I'm a big fan of hers. Love a lot of the things she does. We've seen her in some great TV series lately. Help me out, Will, with the big one with the red.
Oh, Handmaid's Tale.
Handmaid's Tale TV series. So many great movies. Anyway, I'm going to get into the description here. I'm going to read the description instead of off IMDb. I'm going to read the Rotten Tomatoes kind of blurb about the movie. Let's see how this goes. So the character's name is Becky something. That's actually her character name in the movie. She's a 90s punk rock superstar who once filled arenas with her grungy all-female trio, Something She. Now she plays smaller venues while grappling with motherhood, exhausted bandmates, nervous record company executives, and a new generation of rising talent eager to usurp her stardom. When Becky's chaos and excesses derail a recording session and a national tour, she finds herself shunned, isolated, and alone. Forced to get sober, temper her demons, and reckon with the past, she retreats from the spotlight and tries to recapture the creative inspiration that led her band to success. That's pretty interesting. I don't know how spoilery that is. Probably not very much, but yeah, this movie was this is one I actually watched today on the plane home from a business trip. I had been hearing a lot about this. This is another film, by the way, that did get a premiere at South by Southwest. I don't know if you knew that.
Yes.
I don't know if you knew that, Will, but it did.
I did, and it sucked so much. This was one that I didn't get a chance to see at South by, and a lot of friends had gone to it and came out of it just saying like, mind absolutely blown. I felt like I missed out.
Yeah, exactly. I saw those same comments coming out of this movie, and I'm like, shit. And it always happens like this. There's always one or two films that you just don't, before you see them, they don't just kind of grab your attention, or they do, but you can't fit them in. And then you hear, oh my God, they were amazing. And this movie, I finally caught up with it. I think I rented it on iTunes. I think that's how I saw this one. And man, this one was a strangely concocted movie. I actually wanted to hate this movie in the first half of it. And then I ended up really loving the movie by the end. That's how this movie turned me around. And I think that's probably very indicative of how effective this movie was. I mean, this movie's about, it's hard to say what it's about, really. I think it's about redemption in a lot of ways. I think it's about, the price of fame in a lot of ways. I think it's about women empowerment. Definitely, I think this movie is. It's got a lot of great things in it. It's got a great soundtrack also that I really love listening to. And the cast is amazing. Let me just run through the cast really quick, Will, and then I'll hand it off to you and you can give me your thoughts. But I ended up really liking this movie a lot. This movie has, of course, we mentioned Elizabeth Moss. It's got Cara Delevingne in it, right? Delevingne, right? I think that's how you say it.
No one knows. She doesn't know.
you never hear her say it, pronounce it the same way twice. Dan Stevens, Agnes Dean or Dane, and I'm gonna look her up because she played a character named Marielle in this movie, and I thought she was, to me, besides Elizabeth Moss, she was a standout of this movie. I thought she played a character named Mari or Mariella. This one has Eric Stoltz in it, right?
Yeah.
Name from the past. I'm like, I know that guy from somewhere. Oh my God, that's Eric Stoltz. Just a lot of great talent in this. Amber Heard. Will, I don't know. What did you think of this one?
So first of all, the actress you were talking about, Agnes Dane.
Yeah, Dane.
So she was in like the major thing that I can think of that she was in that you should check out if you haven't seen yet is 2015-ish. She was in the Terrence Davies movie Sunset Song, which is like a period piece set in like 1900 Scotland, and it's like super good. It's a slow burn Terrence Davies style film, so you have to be in the mood for that. But she's exquisite in it. But yeah, I absolutely love this movie. I love this movie to bits, forward and back. The best way to sort of describe what this film is, like, you know, like where on the shelf it fits. It reminds me a lot of the movie Steve Jobs that Danny Boyle did a couple of years ago, where, you know, remember in that movie, it was just like, it told the story of Jobs, but through like just each act was its own scene. And this film has a similar conceit in that it's really just five scenes about this one character and the people around her, and the kind of the chaos that she instills in herself and in them and in everyone she touches. So if you imagine that sort of lens put over like a 1990s like Courtney Love style character, that's what you've got with Her Smell. It is very creatively shot. Again, the 5-act, you know, each act being its own scene. Structure is wonderful. The fact that so much of even the camera work feels chaotic when chaotic things are happening. But there's also stillness when it's needed. You're absolutely right about the cast. I mean, Elizabeth Moss puts in an absolute workshop here. She gets to do some, you know, that like big acting that, you know, that's a lot of fun to watch when someone doesn't just like play like subtle and nuances, but they get to really like swing for the fences. Elizabeth Moss gets to do stuff here. I mean, her character is just so over the top and so overwhelmed and so overwhelming that she gets to have just those moments that would just absolutely kill on like a sizzle reel. But those only work because of the supporting cast around her, their reactions and kind of the pain that they feel when Elizabeth Moss's character lashes out at them, or the confusion they feel as they're trying to grapple through, like, you know, how do I handle this particular situation? One of the people that I enjoyed seeing in this the most was Gail Rankin, who I haven't seen in a lot of things. She was the one that played the drummer in this. The only other thing that I really recognized her from was she's one of the lead characters in Glow, the Netflix series. She's the Sheila the She-Wolf in that.
Oh, okay.
And she's so good in this. Everyone's so good in this. Dan Stevens is so good in this. Virginia Madsen's so good in this. Amber Heard pops in for a couple of scenes, and she's so good in this. Like, this movie, so I do like sort of a running tab of like what my favorite films of the year are, so that when I get to the end, I can just unbox like the ones that are at the top and figure out what my actual top 20 is. And this one knocked a bunch of films down. And so I don't know, end of year, like it's way too early for that. But right now it's kind of sitting in my like kind of 3-ish slot for the year. And that's really, really, really damn good for a movie that kind of struck me out of nowhere.
Yeah, well, I like I said, I like this movie a lot, and I think you talked about her acting and kind of the big moments that she had. She had a ton of big, huge moments in the beginning, probably the first half of this movie, and I don't know. Some of those felt a little bit forced, maybe, and I kind of took me out just a little bit. I thought her strongest acting was kind of in the second half of the movie, maybe the more quiet stuff that she does, in contrast to what she did, in the first part of the movie. I also I mentioned the soundtrack of this movie. There's some fun songs in here that are done. There's a moment in this movie, Will, that is probably my favorite, one of my favorite scenes of the year so far.
Can I guess it without? Because if it's the scene
Without
I think it is,
spoiling
I don't want to spoil it. Does it feature a piano?
Yes, it figures it features a cover song, right?
Yeah. It's same boat. Like it's in the running for like one of the best scenes of the year, as well as we do this thing where we put together like a Movie Bears podcast soundtrack each year, where we put like a little Spotify playlist of all like the notable songs from movies that have played, and so I've earmarked that one for it.
Right, fantastic, yeah, and I don't know, it's like the first, like I said, the first half of this movie, things are happening, and I couldn't get on board. I'm like, oh my god, if the whole movie's like this, I'm going to hate this movie. And it from the halfway point to the end, it fully turned me around, to the point where now I think I might have to go back and watch the first half of this movie again, because I maybe was dismissing some of it, offhandedly, because it just wasn't striking me right. And maybe a rewatch would help me pick out some of the, appreciate it more and pick out some of the things that I may have dismissed earlier and give them a second look.
And all parts of this movie sort of work together with one another, because this is a character who is an absolute like maelstrom. Like this is a person who sucks all of the energy in the room into herself and then unleashes it on whoever and whatever strikes at her whim. And so you need to see her at her worst to be able to see her in other stages of her life, to be able to see kind of like, well, what is there's these little like cut scenes that play in between each of these vignettes that show sort of them at the beginning of her and her band at the beginning of their like trajectory, because they're starting to climb, and you see this like vibrant, successful, like happy woman, and then you also see her in these just like crazy, like manic modes as well. And so I think all of that has to work together. You can't have the quiet without having the loud. You can't have the loud without having the quiet. And it's a testament to Elizabeth Moss that, to me at least, I think she hit every single one of those marks so well. The director on this, Alex Ross Perry, he's the type of guy who he's got only a few films under his belt so far, things like Listen Up, Philip, and Queens of Earth and such. And he's not the type to make a big mark on anything outside of like the indie scene, like to the point where like he doesn't even make a splash at like the Independent Spirit Awards and things along those lines. But I would like to see this one get recognized for just the things that it does very well. Like, it's so early in the year. I don't think enough people saw this movie. I don't think we're going to have any like Elizabeth Moss nominations or anything like that for what she does here.
I'm not sure.
But, it's one that if you were to ask me right now what type of performances I would like to see in that spot, like, to get a little gold Oscar statue or whatever it was at the end of the year, she's definitely a name that I'd like to throw around. So
one more thing I'd like to mention, though.
Please do.
We mentioned the soundtrack. There was, like I said, there's some fun songs. We mentioned that one piece that was really strong. There's a score in this movie, too. I don't know, Will, I'm sure you noticed it, but it felt to me like almost like a horror movie score. If you watched it, if you listened to it, it had some, reminded me of like one of those scores that, I can't think of the composer's name, but from like Under the Skin, kind of score, which really stood out to me. It made me stand up and pay attention, and it gave the film in spots a very foreboding feeling, and which was, I think, vital to the point of the movie. So I think this is worthwhile, people. Her Smell, go check it out. It's on. I don't know what other platforms it's on, but I know it's on iTunes. And I
saw it on Amazon today.
All right, so it's on Amazon as well. Yeah, check it out. Her Smell, really surprising film.
Yeah, that composer on this is Keegan DeWitt, who has worked with Alex Perry Ross for a few of or I'm sorry, Alex Ross Perry on a few of his films in the past. And I liked so much to the exact, I guess, the same reasons that you liked it. Like, I always felt like this character was very unpredictable, and there was a tension whenever she walked on screen, and the music gave me that same vibe. Like,
Yeah.
I didn't know what to expect. I felt uncomfortable in a good way watching this movie. Like, I felt like at any moment something could go wrong.
Something horrible. Yeah.
And there's something to be said for a movie like this. You know what it reminds me a little bit of is, do you remember that the car scene in 8th grade? How like there wasn't anything like actively terrifying that happened in that scene, but it just made you the whole time just sort of sit there with your shoulders tensed up because like at any moment something maybe could happen.
Something terrible. Yeah.
That's what huge chunks of this movie did to me.
Right.
I got all of the tension without any of the cheap alleviating jump scares that you sometimes get from a movie, which means this was probably more effective at getting my adrenaline going than a lot of the scarier movies that I've seen in the last year. Go figure, right?
Right. Yeah, I think we like I said, I think we covered this one really well, and one of the surprises for me. I don't know where it ranks because I haven't really done any kind of rankings yet. I don't rank on. I'm not as good as on Letterboxd as you are about the rankings, but it's definitely up there. It's definitely up there for me as one of the better movies of the year so far.
So let's move on to our second film, second film in our streaming roundup. And so we talked about a musical tinged drama. Let's switch over to documentary territory. How do you feel about that, Jim?
I love it, especially in this case. This is going to be a fun one to talk about. I know we're going to be all over the map with these three movies. We got kind of a musical horror drama movie under our belts, and now we're going to get into a political documentary. So let's get into it.
Absolutely. So here we've got Knock Down the House. So Knock Down the House is a documentary that was released on Netflix. It was sort of a notable one for a few different reasons. One, Netflix purchased this one for like $10 million, and it made a bunch of waves because of that. And two, so the story of this film, it's about
spending that Netflix money.
Yeah, spending that Netflix money. So this documentary is about 4 women who ran for Congress during the 2018 elections cycle, and all 4 of them ran as sort of like in underdog positions, trying to knock down the House, basically like, take over the spot of an incumbent, whether it be at the primary stage of things or at the general election as that came later in the cycle. So the documentary follows each of these 4. And the 4 women were all sort of long shots for those particular roles. It just so happens that, and this is the big spoiler of the episode, but, one of them, Miss Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, ended up winning the spot. And so that was where this one made a lot of buzz. This was a documentary about her climb before anyone the movie captured a lot of stuff, a lot of footage that happened before she was on a lot of people's radar. And so this is almost unprecedented. It's one of those like lightning in a bottle style captures that this filmmaking crew just happened to follow kind of the right person during this one. So this documentary is on Netflix. It was also one that we screened at South by Southwest. And so it was nice to be able to there's kind of an accidental theme happening here as well. I really like this documentary. I love kind of scrappy political underdog stories. I think those are always enticing to me. I love seeing people sort of try to tackle the establishment. I like seeing, how that impacts the communities that the politicians are running to support. And I love seeing when they're successful at it too. You can definitely see why, if you don't know a lot about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, as you may have heard her called, you might be wondering sort of you maybe seen some memes or some whatever posted about her, but you may if you don't follow politics, you may not know. And I think this gives you a good look at who she is as a person, just sort of the charisma and the energy that she wields. And I thought that was really fascinating. I really like this documentary. I think that it's a well put together piece. It follows 4 very interesting stories, and it has a through line that I think makes for a compelling narrative, even if you're not interested in the political stuff. And if you are, cherry on top of the sundae.
Right.
Jim, how did you feel?
Yeah, I was surprised by this film as well. I am a fan of documentaries. Political documentaries are kind of hit and miss. They can be really dry, and kind of boring talking head stuff. But this wasn't that. I learned a lot watching this documentary, and if you want a movie that's going to make you kind of energize you, maybe, and make you feel a little bit better about our god awful political situation in the US, I think this is a good movie to start with. It's interesting how this movie came about. The filmmaker, Rachel Lears is her name. She approached a grassroots organization called 2 of them called Justice Democrats and Brand New Congress, who were organizing and kind of helping for progressive Democratic candidates for Congress in the 2018 midterm elections, right? So, yes, it ended up primarily featuring Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who won her race in the New York congressional district. But I liked it because it also focused on a few other female Democratic candidates, namely Amy Vieira, I think her name is. I'm not sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. Cori Bush and Paula Jean Swearingen, who were also mounting these kind of underdog primary campaigns against seated Democratic incumbents in their congressional district, up against huge odds, right? These were incumbents that in some cases are backed by huge corporate money, PAC money. It was kind of crazy to see how that, if somebody wants to run for Congress, if you want to see what you're up against when you run for Congress, this is a fantastic movie to watch. And I think it also is what's the word I'm looking for? It kind of engages and will encourage anybody to maybe get involved in the process. But I like this film a lot, Will. What were some of the things about it that you liked?
So I think there were a few things that really captured my attention on this one. And, of course, very obviously, and it probably shows in the way that I talked about it in the intro section, but, I'm definitely an AOC fan. Like, I like what she brings to the House. I love, like, the ideas that she brings forth. I love the way she brings them forward. So watching her story from this perspective of someone who I kind of got the vibe watching her, like, I don't know that she felt like it was in the bag at any point. Like it was not like a done deal that she was going to get this thing, but she was passionate about it. She worked for it. She tried for it. And so seeing the excitement as she's, as the numbers start coming in and seeing the reactions to people, as people are giving her on the street, like, I think that was really compelling to watch as well. But the other thing that was impressive to me was to see the amount of passion from everybody else involved in this as well, because it's really easy to kind of hone in on her because she's the one that's kind of up front and center in the marketing because she's the celebrity rock star of this cast. But every single one of these candidates was so passionate about what they were doing. They weren't running on a lark. They were running because the issues mattered very closely to them. Because they felt like the topics that were dear to their heart weren't being represented by their representatives. And so they thought, well, if no one's going to do this for me, I'm going to have to do this myself. So watching each of those candidates just sort of make their play at it, and even the ones that weren't successful with it, it was just, I feel like it's really easy to be cynical about politics right now because of very, very, very obvious reasons. I mean, I'm thinking about the stuff that's happened in the news the last couple of days, and it beats you down, and
It seems like it's the last couple of days every week at this point.
Oh God, it always feels like, like we're living in the end times. Everything's dark and dire. You mentioned The Handmaid's Tale, and we're talking about Elizabeth Moss. It feels like we're, those flashbacks in A Handmaid's Tale when it's like things are just starting to get bad, but no one quite figures it out yet. It feels like sometimes like we're living in those flashbacks, like we're like in those times right now. And so it feels very depressing to think about just politics and what happens. And so seeing people fight so hard for what they believe to be right and bring so much of that passion, energy to it, like it sort of washes away a little bit of that cynicism. Not all of it, obviously, but it helps. It's like at the bottom of Pandora's box. All that's left is hope. It instills me with hope.
Especially going in. I mean, these candidates know they're up against incredible odds, right? A lot of them really don't have much of a chance. They don't have the funding. They don't have the support. They're fresh faces. You can stump for change all you want, but going up against incumbent candidates is a tough thing. And this movie showed that very clearly. And I love this movie for that, because you have all these people in a room, having a Justice Democrats meeting, and they're talking about, it takes like 100 like grassroots candidates to maybe place one person through in an election. And those are the odds that these people and people, on the Democratic side or on the, on the newcomer side are facing. And it was just amazing to kind of see that drive that they had, knowing that they were going up against impossible odds. These people are heroes, basically, at trying to change the system against incredible odds. So that's what I liked about this movie. It's also a well put together documentary. It was the filmmakers started this film the day after our current president, or 45, whatever his name is, was elected into office, which is pretty interesting. A pretty interesting fact about the movie.
One thing that was really neat about the screening I saw at South by Southwest. Now, I saw the second screening, so I didn't have the full slate of kind of the four leads there, but we did have the Q&A with one of the candidates, one of the ones who did not win her election, unfortunately, and that was Paula Jean Swearingen, who ran for Senate in West Virginia. And so there was this Q&A with her, and it was interesting because a lot of times you go to a film Q&A and it's very much like, oh, what type of camera did you shoot on? Or I felt like the themes were about this. Am I right? Validate me, filmmaker. Like it's kind of the same crap over and over again. But this was very different because they weren't talking to her about the movie. Some of the Q&A questions that the audience asked were things like, what was it like having, like, seeing like both your triumphs and your failures kind of play on screen? Like there were some good questions about that, but there were a lot of people, primarily like young women in the audience, who were like, I remember one girl, and I forget exactly where she was from, but it was from a Central American country, and I don't remember exactly which one. And she said, like, what this has inspired me to do is go back, and because people from all over the world come to South by Southwest. And I'd been thinking about running for some of my local offices as well. And this has inspired me to go back and do exactly that. And she started crying. And then Pauline Swearingen started crying. And it was just this touching moment where, like, even someone who didn't win her election has inspired someone to help make an impact in their community and, help maybe even like, be that first little drop in the bucket that helps change the world down the line. Right. You don't know.
And that's why these women I think are sort of heroes, right? Because they're blazing a trail for other people to follow in their footsteps and eventually maybe break through and get to some real good change, in this country and some real mix of political ideas, So That was great. I mean, to see that, I wish I could have been at one of those screenings to participate in that Q&A. But you're right. Like these Q&As, especially for documentaries, it's funny because they're much less about the film usually
Right.
than they are about the subject, right? And the subjects that are in the film. And so that's an interesting thing about the Q&As for docs.
Jim, before we move on to the third of our roundup films, do you have anything else to say about Knock Down the House?
No, all I'll say is, anybody with an access to a Netflix account, go check this documentary out. It's called Knock Down the House. It's definitely worth like 90 minutes or less of your time. It's also, like I said, it's a very concise documentary. So, it's not going to take up a lot of your time, but I think it's worth watching. And I think it will energize people just watching this, and the conviction that these women have in these races, I think will maybe energize and encourage us, for the next election cycle, to do what we can do.
Okay, so that brings us on to our final film of our streaming roundup, The Wandering Earth. Jim, what's this one all about?
Oh, The Wandering Earth. So, interesting story about The Wandering Earth. The Wandering Earth is a movie that I heard about online before I heard anything about it. I had heard that this movie was like the biggest movie in China. This is a Chinese produced, Chinese directed, all Chinese actors. And this movie made like Marvel money basically in China. It made like over $700 million in its run the beginning of this year in China. And that's saying something. So this is a straight up science fiction movie. And I'll read I'll read the Rotten Tomatoes plot summary here. The Wandering Earth tells the story of a distant future in which the sun, our sun, is about to expand into a red giant and devour the earth, prompting mankind to make an audacious attempt to save our planet. The multi-generational heroes build 10,000 stellar engines or Earth engines in an effort to propel planet Earth out of the solar system in the hope of finding a new celestial home. During the 2,500-year-long journey, a group of daring heroes emerge to defend civilization from unexpected dangers, new enemies, and to ensure the survival of humanity in this age of the wandering Earth. So this was an interesting film that I saw the trailer a while back, and I'm like, oh, looks like an interesting, action adventure space movie. And so I gave it a shot, and I really appreciated this movie because it seems like in ways it seems like a lot of action movies that we see now. Like I equate it more to like the natural disaster movies that we have, like San Andreas or Skyscraper without The Rock, of course, and movies like that. But this has a lot of hard sciencey stuff in it, as well as being an action adventure. Does it all make sense? I guess we could argue about the believability of some of the science in this movie and some of the things that are done kind of in the plot of this movie, and trying to move the Earth out of the solar system with the bunch of basically engines that we build on Earth and turn the Earth into an actual moving celestial body. But I think this movie doesn't just gloss over a lot of that stuff. I think they dive in on some of the science stuff and cover a lot of things like, well, how are people going to survive while we move away from the planet? Oh, well, we're all going to go underground. And this is the spoiler. This is in the beginning of the trailer. But I kind of dug this movie. This is not, I don't know if it's going to light up the US box office because it is a Chinese movie. It is either subtitled or dubbed. By the way, I will say this is a kind of an exception to my rule. Will, I don't know about you, but I watched the dubbed version of this, and I'll explain why I did that as opposed to the subbed version. I'll explain that a little bit later. But yeah, The Wandering Earth guys, if you're, anybody who's listening to this, if you're a science fiction fan, I think this is a worthwhile watch as a straight up science fiction action adventure movie. Does it have its cheesy parts? Absolutely, right? This is a Chinese movie, and they have kind of a certain way to portray drama and comedy together. And this is not a comedy, but there are moments sprinkled in that are meant to be to be comedy, and they do come across as a little cheesy. I won't say they all work, but the basic story of this, I think it was worth watching for me. Will, I don't have no idea what you're going to say about this movie, so go ahead.
Yeah, I had fun with this movie, even though it's sort of a mess in spots. Let's talk a little bit about what this movie is. The best way to sort of encapsulate what this film feels like is it feels like a Roland Emmerich-esque disaster movie. Think like I don't know, like The Day After Tomorrow or 2012. Like one of those movies where it's a group of people dealing with like a bunch of CGI effects where this thing is collapsing on them, then they have to run over to that thing, but also this thing is happening over there, all while trying to do something with humanity's fate in their hands. Like that's a lot of times what those types of survival movies are about. The personal story set on the, as a zoomed in version of this global event. And of course, there's also some trappings of like Armageddon in this, just because very obviously like the whole like space and trying to save the Earth from bad stuff happening. And to that angle, like it mostly works. I think the worst part about this movie is it's a little bloated runtime wise. It says in 20 words what it could say in 15. A few of the characters that get introduced have a little bit more screen time than they probably need, because they don't really have an arc, but they have like banter and things that they need to do.
Yeah.
But the core story of this family, and this sort of like this maid family that comes together is compelling. And there is a section of the film that involves something that's happening on a space station. And I was really into all of that because it reminded me of another movie, which I cannot bring up at all because I feel like that would spoil a lot of the twists that are happening up there. But it was super compelling. The movie was very tense. There is, the CGI mostly works. There's parts of it that feel a little bit like a video game cutscene when there's a lot of things happening. Like some of the rendering isn't great, but it mostly works there. I think the most impressive thing about this movie is sort of what it represents. So this movie has already made like 700 million or more at the Chinese box office alone. So it was, as of a couple of weeks ago, I don't know where things have fallen since. It was like the third highest grossing film of the year internationally. But no one had heard of it because it didn't have like a really big like US release. But what's compelling about that is you've heard about these movies like Iron Man 3 or whatever, like where certain scenes feel like they were tacked on to appeal to a Chinese audience. Like that's a thing that we've been seeing more and more of as films being adjusted to affect global audiences. And this almost feels like a good answer to that. Just like, okay, cool. Thanks for that. Also here, we're going to make a Western style, like sci-fi disaster film, but put our own spin on it. I think that's pretty neat. I think there's something to be said for that. People aren't going to watch it because it's subtitled, or I guess dubbed in your case, but, and that's always a problem for some people. For me, this movie mostly works. Again, it's a little long. CGI doesn't quite click, but the action is fun, and you kind of care for the characters, and that's all you need in these little zoomed in disaster flicks.
Yeah.
Tell me about the dubbed experience, because I know you mentioned there was like, oh, and I did this for a very specific reason. Now I want to hear that. Like, what pushed Jim over?
Well, the issue with this movie is there's a lot going on in it. It's very action packed. I mean, there's a lot going on in almost every scene. There's really not much not much in the way of quiet scenes of just dialogue, two characters just talking to each other. It just doesn't happen very much in the movie. And so a lot of the dialogue is, they're in a the interior of a spaceship or a vehicle. They might have helmets on, so you really can't even really kind of see their faces very well. And a lot of times when there's too much dialogue and a lot of action on the screen, you can only do one or the other. You really cannot, at least I can't, what's the word I'm looking for? Multitask. With reading a bunch of dialogue on the screen, because not only do you have the characters' dialogue, but you have like announcements going on in the background of like, the self-destruct voice on the spaceship is counting down and saying all these things. So you've got multiple subtitle things going on. So there would be a lot to read. And I felt like I was missing out on a lot of what was going on the screen. Plus, like I said, you're not really looking at emotion on characters' faces when they talk. So you're not missing out on that part of it where you're linking the emotion to the way it's spoken in the film. So the dubbing worked fine for me. And I thought the voice acting here was actually really good as well in the dub. So I would, in this movie, I would, depending on your comfort and your preference, I would say typically this 90% of the time I'm doing the subbed version of all non-English films, but this was the exception to the rule, and it worked pretty well for me.
And that's good. I ended up, and I tend to stick with subtitles. I did on this one, not just because it's my default, but also for a specific reason as well. And that was because I ended up watching this one on a flight. And I always watch subtitled anyway on flights, because you have like the this is our captain speaking, and and then and then fasten your seatbelt, like all of that stuff is happening, and so I'm just like, well, I want to be able to hear what's being said, so I don't care what the movie is, I turn on the subtitles. So in this one, it was just like, oh yeah, this is a perfect one for the flight because I'm gonna have it subtitled anyway.
Yeah, and we talked about a movie earlier that's an English-speaking film that I put the subtitles on because sometimes when the characters are maybe like whispering, kind of half whispering, half talking, and speaking to each other and in a hushed tones, you've got to turn the subtitles on, even though it's English-speaking, because you sometimes don't get it. There were 2 movies I watched on the flight where I had watched subtitles. Yet I watched this one on my iPad, and I didn't, and I listened to the dubbed version, which was
is so interesting to me. Like that's like such an interesting reversal.
Yeah.
But I'm the same way on subtitles. Like even at home, if for whatever reason, just like my hearing is weird in that it's sometimes hard for me to differentiate multiple sounds happening at the same time. So I turn subtitles on my Netflix like all the time, and it drives everyone crazy. Just like, can we turn this off? I'm like, okay, I guess so. Interesting. That's just interesting to me.
Well, we watch to maybe take another little tangent on subtitles.
Yeah.
When we watched this penultimate Game of Thrones episode out in Palm Springs with a bunch of dudes, there must have been 14 of us.
I saw the picture
in friend's living room. We had the subtitles on because there were a lot of quiet scenes, and unless you've got like a super duper like home theater sound system, and this sound system was pretty good, but there were still like passages unless you really turn it up. And then the guys in front of the sound system get blasted, and the guys in the back, don't get anything. So we'll do the subtitles for that one too.
Oh my gosh, yeah, like it. Jumping away from subtitles for a bit, just because I feel like I could. I could live in that topic because I love the way that I love comparing the ways that we consume media, because it's super interesting to me that we could both watch a movie but and have things to say about it, and then realize you watch the dub version, I watched the sub version of this movie here, and so we have different reactions to certain things just based on the way that we watched it. That's always compelling to me. One thing I ended up liking about this movie, and it's weird that I ended up liking it because I'm not usually into this type of character. But there is a character in this named Tim. He was he's a Chinese Australian character. In fact, he even says his intro line is basically like, "I'm a Chinese Australian co-production." He's the comic relief, but I kind of liked him. Like, he was fun.
Yeah, that was what I was talking about. Like, so, the comedy stuff in here, it gets a little cheesy. You know what I mean? He's obviously there for comedic breaks and to break up the action. Because, like I said, this thing is like wall to wall action, pretty much, beginning to end, and that's what I liked about it. I also just I kind of like movies that focus on, this isn't too like warring, the Earth fighting off aliens. This is the Earth. These are the people of Earth trying to come together to save our planet, right? We all, I think, recognize, or at least I do, that I think our planet is not in a good state lately, and things aren't getting better, right?
Yeah.
Call it what you want: global warming, the bleaching of the oceans and pollution, all that stuff. Things are on the downswing for Earth, and so I think in the back of our minds, the demise of Earth is something that could really happen. So this is a way to, the demise of the Earth here is not due to internal factors; it's due to an external factor, right? Of the sun basically burning out. But the way that the movie represented kind of all nations of the Earth coming together to save the Earth, I thought was really good. This was not, at least I didn't get the sense that this was a China like propaganda movie in any sense. Yes, it was from the viewpoint of Chinese folks and centered on those characters, but I got the sense that this was the people of Earth working together to make the planet, to save the planet. And so, is the science far-fetched? Well, maybe. And I kept thinking about, like, how do these people survive, and how do they fuel these engines and all this stuff? And the movie pretty much had an answer for just about anything that I could think of. And even like when it talked about, and this isn't really a spoiler, but when it talked about they had to stop the rotation of the Earth, right, to get it so that they could put the engines on one side of the Earth and get it to move along a trajectory. And they said when they stopped the rotation of the Earth, they got these giant tidal waves, right? Because you can imagine, like, if you take something that's spinning, you stop the Earth and the inertia of the water, like, you're going to get these huge tidal waves.
Half the global population died.
Yeah, and I thought that was, the fact that they thought this stuff through, I thought was really good. And like I said, I'm sure people can come up with scientific holes in this premise, but I thought the premise was pretty good.
Yeah, I don't watch a movie like this for 100% scientific accuracy. I just need it to be accurate within the logic of the film. This is a science fiction film. It makes some pretty dramatic leaps, but it does so within its own fiction, and it works within that own fiction. I like that. Yeah. It was fun seeing them kind of bounce around to different areas. Like, they have the section where they're heading off to Hangzhou. And then they just, they then have to swing back around here. They swing over to Beijing. Like, they're going to all these different places. And we're seeing how they've been impacted by this wandering journey that they've been on, like what the surface is like once this thing's going on. We get to see the scope of this mission in terms of like the number of years it's going to take. It's not just like here's our plan and we'll be done tomorrow. Like, it's a
after we get past this challenge, we're good, right?
Yeah. It's like, this is a plan that's supposed to take like 2,500 years. It's crazy. I don't know. This was a lot of fun. Like I said, there's messy parts to it. I think that those messy parts are kind of inherent to the genre, though. Like, I think that the same faults I have with this, I would have with just about any film in the genre. And I think that its strengths are ones that are stronger than other representatives of it. So it's fun, it's big, it's loud, it's action-packed, and it somehow still manages to squeeze some heart in there where it can. And so, what more can you ask for?
And Netflix took a chance on it. So you can find it right now on Netflix. Again, if you have access to a Netflix account, You can go watch 2 of these movies we talked about tonight right now on your Netflix account. So check it out, The Wandering Earth.
And Jim, this has been fun. Like, it was fun to talk about these 3 films, but I don't know. I'm not done yet. Let's do a lightning round.
I've got 2 more. I don't know how much lightning I can give you, but I'll give you 2 more.
Give me some of that lightning in a bottle, Jim. Get like lightning round, just kind of quick. What else have you got that's streaming that's worth talking about?
I got a movie that's kind of been on my radar for a couple of years now. It came in under the radar. It's called stars Daniel Radcliffe, and it's called Jungle. I don't know if you've had a chance to see this one.
I haven't.
But I'm a sucker for jungle adventure movies. And this is a modern jungle adventure movie. Kind of you like Survivor, Will, right? Does anybody else watch Naked and Afraid? That's another one. Now, I won't spoil whether Daniel Radcliffe gets naked or not in this movie.
Does he go full Equus?
I won't spoil. I'll just say that if you like Naked and Afraid, this film has kind of a little flavor of Naked and Afraid, like survival in the jungle. That's what this movie's about. I'm going to quickly read it. It says a group of friends join a guide for a trek into the Bolivian jungle, searching for an Indian village. The men soon realize that the jungle is a difficult place to be. So, it's a straight up jungle adventure movie. Daniel Radcliffe does a really good job in this movie. Also stars, what's his name? I'm trying to remember the guy's name in this movie. Oh boy. I'm losing it.
I want to start. Do you want me I can just throw out actor names. Like, is it Tony Shalhoub?
Yes, Tony Shalhoub. Yes.
That'd be great. If I nailed that, like, wouldn't that be just like the best, like, from the half court line, like, shot ever?
Yeah. It's basically, Daniel Radcliffe and some guys that may be up and coming, but I just like this movie. It doesn't pull any punches. No big weirdness or twists, but a pretty solid entry into jungle adventure. So that's one of my picks this week. What do you got?
Well, what's your other one?
Okay. I'm going to go from jungle adventure to pioneering settlers adventure. How's that? This is a movie from 2010, so this movie's been around a while. And for some reason, I'm on a Kelly Reichardt kick these days. And the one I'm going to give you now is called Meek's Cutoff. I'm also on a Michelle Williams kick as well. She's one of my favorite actors ever. This one, I'll read it really quick. Settlers traveling through the Oregon desert in 1845 find themselves stranded in harsh conditions. This movie is kind of strange. Like the whole movie is these settlers going across the country, trying to get to I forget where it is they're going to, but they're running out of water. They're encountering all kinds of things. You feel like you are on the trek with these people. This movie draws you right in. It's got, even though women were maybe not as able to have as much agency as they are today, back in 1845 and settler mindset. The characters, especially the character played by Michelle Williams here, is a great example of like a strong woman character in a male dominated society, for sure. But the cast here, right? We got Bruce Greenwood, Will Patton, Zoe Kazan, Paul Dano. Just a really great cast in this one. Check it out. It's a slower movie. I mean, this is, they're going across the desert, and there's a lot of beautiful cinematography in this movie. It's called Meek's Cutoff is the name of it.
Good picks.
Mm-hmm.
So mine are going to be a little disappointing in that, like, I've watched a few streaming things for this episode, and I've got 3 to talk about briefly, but 2 of them are less in terms of recommends and more just like I want to make you aware of them.
Okay.
Because they're not strong recommends. One of them is on Netflix right now, and it's called Unicorn Store, and it's Brie Larson's directorial debut. She stars and directs in it, and it stars her as this woman who like
Captain America. I mean,
Captain Marvel herself. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Captain Marvel goes back home to live with her parents, in this case, Joan Cusack and Bradley Whitford, as she tries to get her life back together. While there, she receives this mysterious invitation to this unicorn store where the proprietor, Nick Fury, Samuel L. Jackson, offers to to sell her a unicorn if she does certain things to better her life. It feels like sort of like an adult fairy tale, and when I say adult, I don't mean like R-rated, like like that material, but just like it's a fairy tale type story for someone in their 20s, someone who's trying to find direction. I liked what this film was trying to go for. It feels like it doesn't quite it doesn't stick the landing. It struggles at part through its runtime. It's not a home run of a watch at all, but Brie Larson is always engaging, and just sort of like the kind of the hope in this film is fun to check out. Mm-hmm. So that one's Unicorn Store, and it's on Netflix. Also on Netflix is a documentary that was about a very fascinating subject. It was just the documentary itself was a little bit sloppily put together, so it was hard. It's really hard to recommend it, but it's called Perfect Bid: The Contestant Who Knew Too Much, and it's about this guy who memorized all of the prices on The Price is Right, and he got so good at them that he was sort of partially responsible for a few years ago, another contestant was hearing things from the audience, and he heard the guy calling out the prices, and he got the showcase showdown to the dollar, and it created this huge.
So a contestant on the show kind of like homed in on one particular person in the audience who was yelling prices out to him. Yeah.
Well, yeah, because this guy, to be fair, like they had this guy. This was his like 36th taping to attend, and he had been a contestant at one point in the past as well. But he was sitting next to the contestant that got it right on the money. Sitting next to his wife, and they'd been talking beforehand about how he was good at that stuff, and so like they were calling out the exact numbers, and he was looking over, and that's not against the rules. It is if like I guess they say that you're not allowed to like sneak in like pieces of paper with prices on it.
Right.
But if you just memorize the stuff, it's on them for not switching out their products enough. But it created this whole little hubbub thing around it. It's an interesting doc. At points it's really funny. At points it sort of like focuses more on like the history of the Price is Right itself, including like some pretty neat interviews with Bob Barker and with
Drew.
None with Drew. Drew's not cast in a great light in this.
Okay.
Yeah. I won't go into why, but he's not. In addition to the contestant and Bob Barker, there's some a bunch of interviews with Roger Dobkowitz, who was the producer for like 35 years, like basically during the entire Bob Barker run. So it's a really compelling watch in terms of the subject matter. It's not super well put together, so it's like like the craft of the documentary, like it struggles at points, but if you like the subject matter, it's interesting enough on that point.
Yeah, that's one that Brad and I saw as we were flipping through the Netflix stuff, and we're like, we've got to watch that. We just haven't gotten around to it yet.
It's like an hour. That's the other. Yeah. It's 70 minutes. So I mean, that's like, even though it's like it's not fantastic, like it's good for its runtime. I think that's there's something to be said for that.
We've had a lot of Bear friends that have gone on the show and actually gotten selected. And I think there was one this week that was like one of our friends on Facebook. So here's a funny story. One of our friends that was with us in Palm Springs at the Chub Fest event that we were at his husband was on the show, and the airing was the Monday after Chubfest, but he couldn't mention it. But after we got home, we're like, holy shit, he was on the show.
That's so fun.
So a lot of bear friends of ours have been on the show.
Well, the last one that I've got to mention is going to be very brief because you've already talked about it on the show, but it's worth a mention because it is available for streaming. I know it's on Amazon and it's on iTunes, so that's two places you can get it. It's probably other places as well, but I finally caught up with Bathtubs Over Broadway, the documentary about the guy that tracks down the industrial musicals, about soap and bathrooms and silicone
cars and tractors,
the ones that play at these conventions for like salespeople. And it is it's the opposite of the Price is Right documentary. I think it's why I kind of wanted to put those two back to back. Coming into this, I probably could care less about this subject matter. Like, this is not the type of subject matter that I want to hear a musical done about McDonald's. Okay, whatever. But this documentary is so good at making you care about it, about exploring the people, about exploring from the collectors, from the people that are the musicians, the people who are some of the legends of Broadway who sort of made a living on the side doing these things. There's a lot of human stories that are all intertwined here. And the actual documentary itself is incredibly tightly crafted. Like, this is one of those documentaries that knows the story it's telling and positions all of its segments in such a way that it always carries you through, building to a crescendo of a final moment that is just absolutely breathtaking for a documentary. So this one had me singing in my bathroom all day. It's called Bathtubs Over Broadway, and I strongly recommend you check it out.
Yeah, I think our audience, a lot of folks in our audience would love this movie. Don't be put off by the kind of strange title. This is one of those documentaries that's about one thing, but it really kind of morphs into something like totally different and unexpected and wonderful. And I think this documentary was really great at that. Plus, the education, just the educational value of this alone, to learn how some of these Broadway, Broadway composers and writers and choreographers and actors, singers, they didn't just make a living off of the stuff that you've heard about, the Chicagos and the Hairs and the 42nd Street. They made a living off of these corporations hiring them to do musicals for their annual sales meeting. And that's astounding to me. And it's a lost art also. And movies about lost treasures are also kind of interesting to me. So it ticks off a lot of boxes for me, and I think it will for a lot of you. So check that one out.
Perfect. Well, this was such a fun episode.
Yeah.
I'm so glad that we got a chance to talk about all of these movies. So many movies, Jim, that any of our listeners can go track down right now on Netflix, Amazon Prime, iTunes. We didn't even mention Hulu. There's I'm sure there's several of these on Hulu as well. So these streaming platforms have such a solid movie library that I think we sometimes get stuck, people in general just kind of get stuck on what's the big release coming out? That if you don't pay attention to some of these neat documentaries and independent releases that hit these platforms, you might be sleeping on some absolute gems. You might be sleeping on some gems, Jim. So listeners, a few things that you should know about. Please tune in next week for actually 2 episodes. Coming up next.
Don't miss next week. Do not sleep on next week. You can sleep on Jim, but don't sleep on next week.
Of course, Jim, you don't want them to do that. Yeah, so one of the episodes that we've got coming up on looks like it'll be Monday night. We're going to be joined by the voice of the Movie Bears podcast, Chris Lopez, to dish about the Game of Thrones series finale. So we will be going deep into spoiler territory in that one, since we'll be at the series wrap. So please join us for it. And then later in the week, we'll be back with our regular scheduled episode wherein we talk about some of the bigger film releases to come out over the last couple of weeks. Detective Pikachu is going to be in the mix there. Maybe the new John Wick movie. We'll see how all that falls out. So in the meantime, you can connect with the show via Facebook. You can follow the show on Twitter at MB Podcast. You can find us on YouTube. Our website is moviebearspodcast.com. You can also listen to episodes on Spotify, on iTunes, and on Stitcher Radio. And hey, if you feel so inclined, please, please, please leave us a review on iTunes. We'd love to hear your thoughts, and it also helps other listeners who haven't discovered our show yet maybe find us as well. So we would definitely appreciate that.
Definitely.
Jim, how can listeners connect with you outside of the show?
Listeners can connect with me, and many have, but I always love to hear more. Listeners can connect with me on Twitter about movies at my Twitter account. That's at JJPOUTWEST, JJP Out West. You can also connect with me just on Facebook under my name, Jim Pugliafico.
Perfect. And I'm William Lindis. You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on Twitter at Whatever Cove. And you can also find me on Letterboxd, letterboxd.com. Just look for William Lindis and see the random star ratings I give random movies that I watch. This was so much fun. Jim, thank you so much.
Yes.
Those who joined us in the chat, I saw Paul and I saw
there.
Tony. It's so good hanging out with you all every week. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for listening. Please take care. See you at the movies.
Yep. And we'll see you twice next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.